Disgraced Count saw a pregnant young woman abandoned by her family and married her that very day. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main characters. Isabella had always known what it meant to be a part of a powerful family, but that power meant nothing when her life was turned upside down. Her father, the Earl of Ashford, had made it clear that she had no place in their home once the truth came out. She was pregnant, and though the baby was innocent, it was a mark of shame for the Ashford name. Her family's reputation was more important than her well-being, and with one cold command, she was abandoned. That winter evening, with the snow falling heavily around her, Isabella found herself on the streets of London, a pregnant woman with nowhere to go. She clutched her belongings tightly, her hands trembling in the cold, her heart filled with confusion and fear. The city's bustling streets seemed a world apart from the warmth and luxury she had once known. As she wandered aimlessly, searching for any sign of a safe place to stay, she stumbled upon a man who would change her fate forever. Standing near a carriage, his dark coat blending into the shadows, was a man she didn't recognize. But there was something about him that felt different. His piercing gaze met hers, and for a moment, she felt an odd sense of calm. His voice, deep and authoritative, broke the silence. "You seem lost, miss. Let me help you." His name was Charles, the Count of Blackwood, a man whose name had once been associated with scandal and disgrace. Having fallen from grace due to family betrayal and personal misfortune, he now lived in seclusion, far removed from the social circles he once inhabited. But fate had a different plan for him that night. Seeing Isabella, desperate and vulnerable, he knew he could not turn away. "You can't go out there in your condition," he said gently, his hand reaching out to her. "Come with me. I'll take you somewhere safe." Isabella, too proud to accept charity, hesitated for a moment, but the cold quickly overwhelmed her. She had no other choice. She followed him into the carriage, and as they made their way through the snowy streets, she couldn't help but wonder what kind of man he was. He wasn't like the others she had known. There was a sadness in his eyes, something that made her feel like she wasn't completely alone in her pain. When they arrived at his estate, Isabella was led inside, where the warmth of the fire and the quiet grandeur of the place took her breath away. It was a stark contrast to the cold and emptiness she had just left behind. But as she stood there, looking around the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about this place, and the man who had brought her here, was going to change everything. The next few days passed in a blur. Charles had arranged for her to stay in one of the guest rooms, and he kept his distance, giving her the space she needed to gather her thoughts. Yet, every time they spoke, there was an unspoken connection, a quiet understanding that neither of them could deny. Despite the circumstances, despite the secrets they both held, they began to learn about each other in a way neither had ever expected. And when Charles made an offer that would forever alter both their lives, Isabella found herself faced with a decision she never thought she would have to make. "Marry me, Isabella," he said one evening, his voice low but firm. "I will take care of you and your child. I know you don't want to be a burden, but you're not one. You never were." In that moment, Isabella knew that her life was no longer in her own hands. She had been saved, not just from the cold and the shame, but from the fate she had feared the most. And so, with a heart full of uncertainty and hope, she accepted. The disgraced Count had given her more than a roof over her head. He had given her a future, and in return, she would give him a love neither of them had ever expected to find. As the days passed at Grey Court Hall, Isabella began to settle into a routine. The warmth of the fire, the quiet elegance of the mansion, and the kindness, albeit distant, of Charles, the Duke, had become a strange but welcome comfort. She no longer had to fear the biting cold of the streets, nor the cruel rejection of her family. But despite the safety she now found in these walls, there was an undeniable tension between her and the man who had taken her in. Charles, once the pride of high society, now walked through his grand halls like a shadow of the man he used to be. The whispers of his disgrace still hung heavy in the air, and he wore his isolation like a cloak, refusing to let anyone too close, including her. Every day, he retreated further into himself, and while his actions were kind, his heart seemed forever locked away. Yet, Isabella couldn't help but notice the small gestures, the moments when his guard would falter ever so slightly. A brief glance, a small smile, or the way his hand lingered a little too long on the door when he helped her with her coat. She had been taught never to expect anything from anyone, least of all kindness from a man of his stature, but Charles had defied every expectation. One evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth, Isabella found herself in the study, reading one of the many books Charles had offered her. The storm outside had grown fiercer, the winds howling against the windows as if nature itself were angry. She had grown accustomed to the solitude of the study, but tonight, the silence seemed different, heavier. She glanced up from her book and saw Charles standing in the doorway, his tall figure framed by the soft glow of the candlelight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He simply stood there, his piercing gaze locked on hers. "You seem lost in thought," he said softly, his voice cutting through the quiet like a gentle breeze. Isabella closed the book in her hands and set it aside, her heart racing a little faster than she cared to admit. "Just thinking," she replied, unsure of what else to say. Charles nodded, his eyes flickering briefly to the fire before returning to her. "Thinking of your family?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. Isabella stiffened slightly, the question cutting through her like a knife. Her family, her father, who had cast her out, her mother, who had abandoned her with barely a glance. She had tried to push those memories away, but they were like ghosts, always haunting her, no matter how far she ran. "No," she said quietly, shaking her head. "I don't think about them anymore." Charles's expression softened, and for the first time since their meeting, she saw a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. "I understand," he murmured. "Sometimes, the people we love most are the ones who hurt us the deepest." His words struck a chord in her, and for the first time, Isabella felt a flicker of something more than just gratitude for his protection. There was something else, something complicated, something she wasn't sure how to name. A spark, perhaps, buried beneath the surface of her own guarded heart. The days continued to pass, and the connection between them grew, albeit slowly. They began to share more moments together, small conversations about books, the weather, or their respective pasts. But there were still walls between them, invisible yet solid, built from years of pain and isolation. One evening, as the storm raged outside, Charles found Isabella in the library, her eyes focused on the pages of a book, but her thoughts clearly elsewhere. He approached quietly, not wanting to disturb her, but she sensed him before he spoke. "Isabella," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She turned toward him, her eyes meeting his for the briefest of moments. "Yes, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with curiosity. Charles hesitated, looking as though he were wrestling with something inside him. "I've been thinking," he began, his eyes not quite meeting hers, "about what you said the other day. About family." Isabella felt her heart skip a beat. She had thought he had forgotten the conversation. "And?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a deep breath, then looked at her, his gaze intense. "I want you to know, you don't have to be alone anymore," he said, the words seemingly weighing heavily on him. Isabella blinked, unsure of how to respond. She began, but he interrupted her. "I know that you have your pride, but I've seen the pain in your eyes, Isabella. I've been through my own hell, and I understand what it's like to feel like you have nothing left. But you do have something, someone, who will always be here for you." His words, raw and unguarded, left her speechless. For the first time, she felt as though she wasn't just a burden to him, a charity case to be pitted. She was something more, something real. And just as quickly as that thought appeared, doubt crept in. She had learned long ago to never rely on anyone but herself. But Charles's sincerity, his kindness, it was something she had never known before. And though she was scared of what it might mean for her heart, she couldn't help but wonder if there was a chance for something more between them. Something neither of them had expected, but both so desperately needed. And so, as the storm continued to rage outside, Isabella made a decision, a small one, but significant. She would allow herself to trust him, if only just a little. And in return, perhaps, they could begin the slow, painful journey of healing together. As the days turned into weeks, the atmosphere at Grey Court Hall began to shift. The bitter cold outside was no match for the warmth that started to bloom between Isabella and Charles, the Duke of Blackwood. Their interactions, once strained and formal, became more natural, more comfortable. Every evening, Charles would find a way to make her smile, whether it was through a carefully timed joke, a warm cup of tea, or simply listening when she spoke of her past. Isabella, in turn, found herself slowly letting go of the walls she had built around her heart, the walls she thought were necessary to protect her from the world. She began to trust Charles, not just as the man who had saved her from the streets, but as someone who seemed to understand her in a way no one else ever had. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Charles spoke up, his voice softer than usual. "Isabella," he began, his tone serious, "I know we haven't discussed this before, but I need you to understand something." Isabella looked up from the book she had been reading, her curiosity piqued by the change in his demeanor. "What is it, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice tentative. Charles hesitated for a moment, his eyes flickering toward the fire before returning to her. "I want you to know that my offer, the one I made to marry you, is not out of pity," he said slowly, the words coming with difficulty. "It's not because I think you have nowhere else to go, or because I feel obligated." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. She had always wondered why he had made that offer so readily, but now, hearing him speak with such sincerity, she understood that it had come from a place of care, not obligation. She nodded, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "I never thought it was out of pity," she replied quietly, her eyes meeting his. "But I'm not sure I understand why you would offer me marriage, especially after everything you've been through." Charles leaned forward, his gaze intense, as if weighing the words he was about to say. "Because, Isabella," he said, his voice low and serious, "in you, I see something that I haven't felt in a long time, a reason to fight, a reason to live beyond my own regrets." Isabella felt a lump form in her throat at his words. She had known the Duke's past was filled with shadows, with a pain that ran deep, but she had never known just how heavy that burden was. He had lost so much, yet he had given her the chance to rebuild her life. He had offered her a future. "I'm not asking you to marry me because I need a wife," he continued, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm asking because I want you to be with me, for the right reasons, for both of us. I want you to have a choice." Isabella sat there in stunned silence for a moment, her mind racing as she processed his words. She had never expected anyone to look at her like that, to offer her a future without strings attached. She had always been the one who had to make do, who had to survive on her own. But Charles, with his broken past and his quiet strength, had shown her a different way, a way forward. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Charles reached across the space between them, his hand resting gently over hers. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said softly. "I just want you to know that whatever you decide, you're not alone anymore." His words, simple yet powerful, seemed to echo through the stillness of the room. Isabella felt a warmth spread through her chest, a warmth she had not felt in years. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe, truly safe. As the days continued to pass, Isabella's feelings for Charles grew stronger, and so did his for her. Their relationship, once built on necessity, had transformed into something deeper, something neither of them had anticipated. They began to spend more time together, not just out of obligation, but because they wanted to. They talked, shared stories, and laughed together in a way that made the loneliness they had both carried for so long begin to fade. One afternoon, as they walked through the estate's sprawling gardens, Charles turned to her with a serious expression. "Isabella," he said, his voice unusually tense, "there's something I need to ask you." Isabella looked up at him, her heart suddenly racing. "What is it, Charles?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Charles stopped walking, turning to face her fully. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Isabella's breath caught in her throat as he opened it to reveal a beautiful ring, its diamond glinting in the afternoon sun. "Will you marry me, Isabella?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The question hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Isabella was speechless. This wasn't the same offer from before. This wasn't a gesture of protection or obligation. This was a true proposal, one born of love and mutual respect. She looked into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability and sincerity in them, and her heart swelled. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, I will marry you." And in that moment, as the storm of the past finally began to settle, they both knew that their journey together was only just beginning. As the days passed, Isabella found herself adjusting to her new life at Grey Court Hall. The mansion, once a place of isolation and regret for Charles, now felt more alive, filled with the quiet hum of everyday life and the warmth of a growing connection between them. Their engagement had brought a sense of peace to both of them, though there was still a quiet tension between them, the kind that only two people with so much emotional baggage could feel. Despite the slow-burning affection that was developing, there were still moments when their pasts would surface, like ghosts that neither of them could fully escape. Charles, who had suffered so much loss and pain, struggled with the weight of his own emotions. He would often retreat into the solitude of his study, burying himself in work or simply sitting in silence, lost in his thoughts. Isabella understood, but it didn't make it any easier to bear. She, too, had her own scars, ones that had been left by her family and the world's harsh judgments. She had never imagined herself in a place like this, engaged to a duke, living in a mansion far from the streets where she had once walked alone. But the more time she spent with Charles, the more she realized that there was no other person she could imagine sharing her life with. One evening, after dinner, they sat in the sitting room by the fire. Charles had just returned from another long day in the town, dealing with matters of his estate, and he was visibly tired. Isabella, sensing his exhaustion, poured him a glass of wine and handed it to him. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "I don't know how you do it. How you manage to stay so composed all the time." Isabella raised an eyebrow, curious. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. Charles leaned back in his chair, looking at her with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. "I've seen you go through so much, Isabella. Your family, your past, yet you always seem so strong, so calm. It's as if nothing can shake you." Isabella smiled softly, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm not as calm as you think," she said, her voice quiet. "I've had to be strong because I didn't have anyone else to rely on. I learned early on that no one else would care about me, so I had to take care of myself." Charles set his glass down, his expression growing serious. "You don't have to do that anymore," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm here, Isabella. You don't have to carry everything on your own." His words, filled with sincerity, cut through the walls she had built around her heart. She had always thought she had to face the world alone, that she couldn't trust anyone with her pain. But now, sitting across from Charles, she realized that he was offering her something she had never expected, someone who truly cared for her, someone who wanted to share the burden. "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But it's hard to let go, to trust someone again." Charles nodded, his eyes softening with understanding. "I know," he said quietly. "Trust is something that takes time. But I'll be here, every step of the way, if you'll let me." For a moment, they simply sat there, the crackling fire between them, the room filled with the quiet sound of their breathing. Isabella felt something shift inside her, a small but significant change. She had spent so much time running from her past, from the pain that had followed her. But now, for the first time in years, she felt the possibility of something different, something better. As the days went by, their relationship deepened, and the walls between them continued to crumble. They spent more time together, talking, sharing, and slowly learning to trust one another. The more she got to know Charles, the more she saw past the cold exterior he had built to protect himself, and the more she realized that he, too, was struggling with his own demons. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden, Charles stopped suddenly, turning to face her. "Isabella," he said, his voice serious, "there's something I need to tell you." Isabella felt her heart skip a beat at the tone of his voice. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tentative. Charles hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a quiet, almost apologetic tone. "I'm not the man I used to be. I've made mistakes, and I've hurt people. I've shut myself off from the world because I didn't know how to deal with the pain of losing my wife. I didn't know how to move forward, so I didn't. But you—" He stopped, his eyes searching hers. "You make me want to try again. You make me want to be better." Isabella stood there, taken aback by his honesty. She had never heard him speak so openly about his past, about the loss he had endured. And for the first time, she saw the man behind the title, behind the stoic exterior. She saw a man who, despite everything he had been through, was willing to open his heart to her. "Charles," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "You don't have to be perfect. I don't need you to be someone else. I just need you to be you." Charles reached out, his hand brushing against hers. For a moment, they simply stood there, their fingers gently touching, a silent understanding passing between them. In that simple moment, something shifted between them, something deep, something real. And for the first time since they met, Isabella felt truly at home. As the weeks passed, Isabella and Charles's connection grew stronger, the bond between them becoming more than just one of necessity. The weight of their shared pasts no longer lingered in the same way it once had, and they found themselves discovering not only new aspects of each other, but of themselves. Charles, once a man of solitude and silence, began to open up more, sharing pieces of his life he had long kept hidden. Isabella, who had learned to rely only on herself, started to trust in the warmth Charles provided, allowing her heart to thaw from the years of neglect. One evening, after dinner, as the candlelight flickered softly across the room, Charles found himself looking at Isabella with a depth of emotion he hadn't realized he was capable of. "Isabella," he began, his voice steady but filled with something he couldn't quite define. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you for some time." Isabella turned toward him, her curiosity piqued. "What is it, Charles?" she asked softly, her voice warm with anticipation. Charles looked away for a moment, collecting his thoughts, before meeting her gaze again. "I never expected this," he said, his tone raw with honesty. "I never expected to find someone like you, someone who makes me believe in something again. Before you, I had given up on the idea of love, on the idea that I could ever truly be happy. But you've made me see that maybe there's more to life than my past." Isabella felt her heart skip a beat. The sincerity in his voice, the emotion behind his words, was overwhelming. She had always seen the strength in Charles, the quiet resilience that had allowed him to survive. But now, hearing him speak so vulnerably, she saw a different side of him. She saw a man who, despite all the hurt he had endured, was still willing to try again, to open his heart to her. "Charles," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you don't have to say any of this. I understand. I've been through my own struggles, and I know how hard it is to trust again, to believe in something or someone." Charles took a step closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. "But that's the thing, Isabella," he said softly, his thumb brushing over her skin in a way that sent a shiver through her. "I do trust you. I trust you in a way that I've never trusted anyone before. You've brought me back to life in a way I didn't think was possible. And for that, I'm forever grateful." Isabella felt her chest tighten, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and gratitude. She had never expected this from Charles, never thought she would find someone who could understand her pain and still love her for who she was. In his eyes, she saw not just a man who had saved her, but someone who had healed her in ways she couldn't fully understand yet. "I feel the same way," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought I would find a place where I belonged again. But here, with you, I feel like I finally have a chance to start over." Charles smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time in weeks. "Then let's start over, Isabella," he said, his voice steady and full of hope. "Let's build a life together, one where we don't have to hide from the past, but can move forward with the future we choose." Isabella nodded, her eyes filled with unshed tears, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future filled with love and peace. The next few days were filled with quiet moments of understanding and shared companionship. Charles and Isabella spent their time in the gardens, walking through the halls of Grey Court Hall, and even working together on small projects around the estate. The more they were together, the more their connection deepened, and Isabella began to realize that this wasn't just a temporary arrangement. She was falling in love with Charles, and with every passing day, she felt herself being drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. One afternoon, as they sat together in the library, reading side by side, Charles looked up from his book and met her gaze. "Isabella," he said, his voice quiet but full of emotion, I've been thinking about something, and I need to know how you feel. Isabella set her book down, her heart racing in anticipation. What is it? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Charles took a deep breath before speaking. I've been thinking about our future, he began, his tone serious but filled with hope. And I want you to know that, whatever happens, I want you by my side. Not just as my fiancé, but as my partner, in every sense of the word. I want to build a life with you, Isabella. A life where we support each other, love each other, and face whatever comes our way, together. Isabella felt her heart soar at his words, and without thinking, she reached for his hand. I want that too, she said, her voice steady now, filled with the certainty of her feelings. I want to build a future with you, Charles. One where we both heal, together. They sat there for a long moment, their hands intertwined, the silence between them comfortable and filled with the promise of a shared future. And for the first time in a long while, Isabella knew that she had found not just a safe place, but a place where she truly belonged. As the weeks passed, Isabella and Charles's relationship deepened into something neither of them had expected. The bond between them, once forged by circumstance, had now evolved into something genuine and filled with love. Grey Court Hall, which had once stood as a symbol of Charles's solitude, now felt like a home, full of life and laughter. Isabella had come to realize that this was the place where she truly belonged. The halls, once cold and silent, now echoed with their shared moments, and the garden, which Charles had neglected for so long, had become a place where they would walk hand in hand, planning their future together. One day, as they walked through the rose garden, Isabella felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She had come so far from the lonely girl who had been cast out by her family, and now, with Charles by her side, she felt like she was finally healing. Do you ever think about what comes next? Isabella asked, glancing up at him. Charles looked down at her, his expression thoughtful. All the time, he said softly. I think about the life we're building, about the future we'll have together. I never thought I would get to this point, but now, it feels like everything is falling into place. Isabella smiled, her heart swelling with affection. I feel the same way, she said. I never imagined that my life could turn out like this. I thought I would always be running, always searching for something I couldn't find. But now I know what it feels like to be at peace. Charles stopped walking and turned to face her fully. You're my peace, Isabella, he said, his voice low and full of emotion. You've brought light into my life, and for that, I will be forever grateful. Isabella felt her breath catch in her throat as his words sank in. Charles, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You've done the same for me. You've given me a chance to rebuild, to trust again. I never thought I would find someone who could understand me like you do. They stood there for a long moment, the weight of their shared words settling between them. Finally, Charles took her hand in his, gently squeezing it. Let's make a promise, Isabella, he said, his eyes locked on hers. Let's promise to always face whatever comes next together, no matter what. We've both been through so much, but I believe we're stronger because of it. And I want to face the rest of our lives side by side. Isabella nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I promise, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I promise that we'll face everything together, Charles. Whatever comes, we'll face it with love. The days continued to pass, and with each passing day, their love grew stronger. They spent their time planning for the future, preparing for their upcoming wedding, and imagining the life they would build together. But even as they looked ahead, there were moments when the past would resurface, bringing with it the scars they had both carried for so long. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Charles broke the silence that had settled between them. Isabella, he said softly, his voice hesitant. There's something I need to say, something I've been holding on to for a while. Isabella turned to face him, her heart suddenly racing. What is it? She asked, her voice filled with concern. Charles took a deep breath before speaking. I know we've both been through a lot, and I know I've made mistakes, he said, his voice low. But I need you to know that I'm not afraid of the future anymore. I'm not afraid of being with you, of building a life with you. I want this, Isabella. I want us. Isabella's heart swelled with emotion at his words. I want us too, Charles, she said, her voice steady but filled with warmth. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We've come so far, and I know that together, We can overcome anything. Charles smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Then let's start our new life, Isabella, he said, his hand reaching for hers. Let's face the future with everything we have, together. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Isabella and Charles found themselves living the life they had once only dreamed of. Their love, forged in the fires of pain and loss, had become a beacon of hope and renewal, and they knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side, with love and unwavering commitment. The day of their wedding arrived, a quiet and intimate affair, far from the grandeur of society's expectations. Isabella stood in front of the mirror in her simple yet elegant gown, the delicate fabric shimmering softly in the dim light of her chambers. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the lace at the neckline, the reality of what was about to happen settling in. She had never imagined her life would take such a turn. A year ago, she had been on the streets, abandoned by her family, with no hope for the future. Now, here she was, about to marry the Duke of Blackwood, a man who had shown her what love and kindness could truly mean. Her thoughts wandered to Charles, her fiancé, the man who had offered her not just protection but his heart. He had been her savior, her constant, and now, he would be her partner for life. She thought of the promises they had made to each other, the vows they had shared in quiet moments, away from the eyes of the world. She had never expected to find such a love, but in Charles, she had found something deeper than she could have ever hoped for. Downstairs, in the grand hall of Grey Court Hall, Charles stood at the altar, his back straight, his expression a mix of anticipation and nervousness. He had waited so long for this moment, and now that it was finally here, he could hardly believe it. His thoughts, too, went to Isabella. He had watched her grow stronger over the months, watching her heal from the wounds of her past, and in turn, he had found his own heart healing, piece by piece. The woman who had once entered his life as a stranger was now his everything. She had shown him what it meant to truly live again. As the guests began to settle into their seats, a quiet murmur ran through the room. The doors to the hall opened, and all eyes turned to see Isabella standing at the threshold, her father by her side. The sight of her, beautiful and serene, took Charles's breath away. She was not just the woman he had promised to marry. She was the woman who had captured his heart in ways he never thought possible. When their eyes met, there was a silent exchange between them, a promise that no matter what, they would face the future together. The ceremony was simple, but the words spoken were heartfelt and true. Charles's voice, steady and sure, filled the room as he recited his vows, promising to love and protect Isabella for the rest of his days. Isabella, her voice soft but filled with emotion, pledged her love and devotion in return. I, Isabella, take you, Charles, to be my husband, my partner in life, and my one true love. I promise to stand by you through all that life may bring, to laugh with you, to cry with you, and to love you for all the days of my life. Charles's eyes never left hers as he placed the ring on her finger, the weight of the moment settling in. In that instant, they both knew that their lives had changed forever. They were no longer just two people brought together by circumstance. They were partners, bound by love and a shared future. As the ceremony concluded, the guests rose to their feet, applause filling the hall, but for Isabella and Charles, the world seemed to fall away. There was only them, standing together at the beginning of a new chapter, with a future full of promise and possibility. The reception that followed was filled with laughter and celebration, but for the newlyweds, it was the quiet moments they cherished most. Later that evening, after the last guest had left and the mansion had returned to its peaceful stillness, Charles and Isabella found themselves alone in the sitting room, their hands intertwined. They sat in silence for a moment, each of them reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. It feels unreal, Isabella whispered, her head resting on Charles's shoulder. A year ago, I never would have imagined this. Never would have imagined you. Charles kissed the top of her head, his heart full. I never imagined you either, he replied softly. But now that I have you, I can't imagine life without you. They sat together, the fire crackling in the hearth, their hearts at peace for the first time in a long while. Outside, the stars shone brightly in the night sky, a reminder that no matter how dark the night had been, there was always a new day waiting on the horizon. And for Isabella and Charles, that new day was now theirs to share. The future, once uncertain and full of shadows, now stretched before them, full of light, love, and endless possibilities. And as they embraced, knowing that they had each found their place in the world, they knew that no matter what challenges might come, they would face them together, stronger than ever before. The months that followed their wedding were filled with peace and joy, as Isabella and Charles settled into their new life together. The walls of Grey Court Hall, once cold and distant, were now filled with laughter, love, and a sense of home. Charles, who had once lived in the shadows of his past, found himself embracing the future with renewed hope, and Isabella, who had been broken by her past, now felt whole again. They spent their days in each other's company, walking through the gardens, reading together by the fire, and slowly, together, they began to heal from the scars of their previous lives. Isabella had found something she thought she would never have again: peace. The weight of her family's rejection had slowly lifted, replaced by the unwavering support and love from the man she had married. For the first time in her life, she felt truly cherished. Charles, too, was changing. His deep, quiet sorrow, which had once been an unshakable part of him, was being replaced by a sense of purpose. He had always believed that he could never love again, that his past mistakes would forever haunt him. But Isabella had shown him otherwise. She had given him the courage to open his heart once more, and now, as they worked together to build a life, he realized that the man he was becoming was one he could finally be proud of. One afternoon, as the sun shone brightly through the windows of their sitting room, Isabella sat by the fire, a book open in her lap, but her thoughts far away. Charles entered the room, his presence familiar and comforting, and he paused when he saw her sitting there, deep in thought. "Isabella," he said softly, his voice pulling her back from her thoughts. She looked up and smiled at him, the warmth in her eyes undeniable. "Just thinking," she replied, her voice soft. "Thinking about us." Charles walked over and sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "What about us?" he asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Isabella hesitated for a moment, her fingers tracing the lines of his hand, the steady beat of his pulse a constant reminder of the bond they shared. I never thought I would find a life like this," she said quietly. "I never thought I would feel at peace again. I thought I would always be running from my past, from the pain. But now, with you, I feel like I can finally stop running." Charles squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with love for her. "You don't have to run anymore, Isabella," he said softly. "You're home now, with me." Isabella's heart fluttered in her chest at his words. She had never imagined that she could have a home again, but in Charles's arms, she found one. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes closing as she let the warmth of his embrace envelop her. "I never thought I would be able to let go of my past," she whispered. "But with you, I feel like I can finally forgive myself." Charles rested his cheek on top of her head, his breath steady and calm. "You've forgiven yourself long ago, my love. You just needed to believe it." The days continued to pass, each one filled with the quiet joy of their shared life. They worked together to restore the estate, planting flowers in the garden and making Grey Court Hall a true home. Charles took a more active role in the community, rediscovering his connection to the people around him, while Isabella found purpose in the charity work she had always been passionate about. It wasn't long before they became known not just as the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood, but as a couple who had turned their pasts into something beautiful, something that would stand the test of time. But despite the contentment they found in their everyday life, there was still one thing they both longed for, something that would complete their family. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Charles turned to Isabella, his eyes filled with love and longing. "Isabella," he began softly, "I've been thinking about something." Isabella looked up at him, her heart beating faster at the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Charles took a deep breath, his hand resting gently on hers. "I want to start a family with you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want to have children. I want to build a future together, not just for us, but for the little ones who will one day grow up in this house, with the love we've built." Isabella's heart swelled at his words. She had always dreamed of having a family, of having children who would know nothing but love and happiness. But the thought of bringing a new life into their world felt even more precious now, with the foundation they had built together. "I want that too," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth. "I want to start a family with you, Charles. I want to raise our children here, in this home, where they'll know love and security." Charles leaned in and kissed her forehead, his heart full of love. "Then let's make that dream a reality," he whispered. And so, as the seasons changed and the world around them blossomed, Isabella and Charles's love continued to grow. They faced each new day with hope, knowing that whatever challenges they would face them together, as a family. They had found their home in each other, and no matter what the future held, they knew that love would always guide them forward. As the months turned into years, the life Isabella and Charles had built together only grew more beautiful. Grey Court Hall, once a place of isolation and regret, now radiated with love, warmth, and the promise of a bright future. The echoes of laughter filled the halls, and the garden, once forgotten and wild, bloomed with the colors of their happiness. They had not just restored the house, but they had restored each other. Isabella had found a place where she truly belonged, not just in the walls of Grey Court Hall, but in Charles's heart. He had shown her what it meant to love again, and in doing so, he had healed her more than she ever thought possible. They had created a family of their own, and the love between them was something neither of them could have imagined in their darkest days. One day, as they sat in the drawing room, their children playing quietly nearby, Charles looked at Isabella with a softness in his eyes that still made her heart flutter. "Isabella," he said, his voice calm and steady, "do you ever think about how far we've come?" Isabella smiled, her gaze turning to their children before returning to him. "Every day," she replied, her voice full of warmth. "I think about how much we've built together, how much we've healed, and I feel so incredibly blessed." Charles reached out, taking her hand in his. "I feel the same," he said. "When we first met, I never imagined this life, this happiness. I never thought I'd find someone who could fill the emptiness I felt inside. But you made everything different. You made everything worth it." Isabella's heart swelled at his words. "I never thought I could be loved like this," she said softly. "I didn't think I deserved it. But here we are, with a family and a future, and I know now that I do deserve it. I deserve you." Charles squeezed her hand gently. "And I deserve you, Isabella. You've taught me more than I could ever express. You've made me believe in the possibility of love, and now we get to share it with our children. There's nothing more I could ever want." As they sat together in the quiet of the afternoon, Isabella looked around the room, at the life they had built, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had come so far from the pain of their pasts, and now they had everything they had ever dreamed of and more. Their children, a reminder of the love they shared, played happily at their feet, their laughter filling the air. It was a moment of peace, of fulfillment, and Isabella knew that this was exactly where she was meant to be. They had both been through so much, but together, they had found something beautiful. They had found a future, a love, and a family. And as they watched their children grow, as they looked to the future they would build together, they knew that no matter what came next, they would face it side by side, stronger than ever before. The past was no longer something that haunted them. It was something they had learned from, something that had made them who they were. And now, they stood at the beginning of a new chapter, one that would be filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a lifetime spent together. "Together, forever," Charles whispered, his eyes locked on Isabella's. "Forever," she replied, her voice filled with conviction. And with that, they knew that no matter what the future held, they would always have each other, and that was all they truly needed.